Welcome back to the second episode of this Jewel game tutorial on how to make a platformer game. So where we last left was we had a scene with a couple of shapes on it. So we had a player, and we have our ground here. We were not able to change this background. After that last episode, I ended up fixing the bug that was causing the background color change. So all you need to do is you need to go to this camera tab and then click background, this little square here. And then we can enter this hex code, which is FCD, FCD, FF. So once we do that, then we have our background color that we want, and then we're going to add some movement and write a little bit of code. What we want to do first is let's start figuring out how to add sprites. Let's start with the tile down here, and let's change this from a shape to a sprite. So let's click it. Let's make sure we're on that. The outline's red for it, so that's why we can't see an outline when we click it. And what we'll do is let's delete the shape component. Then we'll go to new sprite and then add a new sprite component. We need to go in the sprite, look down images, and then select the tile map. And this is where all of our items are going to be based off of, because everything in our scene is going to be from this one image. So we'll always be using that tile map. We'll create some ground first. What we can do with this tool here is if we hit Control and scroll, then we can kind of move around and zoom in. And then if we right click and drag, then we can pan around this scene. It's kind of awkward right now, but right now we just have to deal with it. This has already been selected, but I'll reselect it just to show. But we need to click at the top left. I kind of missed. From the top left, drag it all the way down, and then capture all of that image there. If we want to close this, we should close this at the bottom left, and it'll close that window. And then now if we look at our scene, we can see that's updated. But the easiest way to build out the scene is to start like this, build your object completely out. We have a collider on it, we have its name, and we have a sprite on it, and then start duplicating it. So what I like to do is, so I click on it, I'm going to hit Control D and then get a shape I want. It's going to be a very common shape or image. And then go here, and a very common one is going to be, this flat ground, because we're going to have a lot of flat ground in the scene. And you can build it however you want. This is just how I'm doing it. And then now I've changed the crop. I can go back to my scene. I'm going to close this here. Just makes it easier. Go back to my scene. And then I'm going to hit, after I have it clicked, I'm going to hit Control Shift D. And then now I have a tool here. And as I hold Control, it'll snap to the grid. So then I can just click, 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 click. And all I'm going to do is just create a long runway here. This is just going to be easier for me for the tutorial's sake. But you can build the scene however you want. And then to leave this brush, you hit Control Shift D again, and then it'll place your last block. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to click that block, and I'm also going to update the crop of this sprite and make it that end part here. Click it, drag it, boom, and close this. This is very important, close that. And then now we have a very long platform. And then let's hit Control S just to be safe, to save, or file or scene, save. And then let's play and pause our scene, and then go to game tab, and then we see our game is still running fine. And then let's stop our scene, and then it crashes. So sorry about that. So our scene just crashed, but that was an issue I just ended up fixing. So you should not see yet at this point a scene crash, but this is why I'm reminding you to continue saving, because this can and will crash. But let's get back to it. So what we're going to do next, we've built out this little platform here. What we're going to do next is we're going to start adding some player movement. Well, let's add the player first. So we'll do the same thing here. We'll delete that shape. We'll go to new sprite, and then we will, for this one, also select the tile map, and then we'll zoom in on the tile map, and then let's start with our default player here. Let's start with that player here. Which one? Right there. And then this is a little bit hard to see where we should stop selecting the player. We'll do a grid step of 17, because that's how this is sliced. So do grid step of 17 up here, so it makes it easier. And for now, let's do the top here. And then, actually, let's just do the full 17. Let's do that. Hopefully I can get it. Okay, we're having some issues here. Actually, that's fine. We'll just select that and we'll leave it at the player's feet there. Perfect. Um, and then let's close this right here. That'll close that window. Just to be safe, let's hit Control S, and then let's play and pause our scene. I like to keep doing that just to make sure everything's all right. Now we can actually start adding some code. So in our project, we already have a script that I've left in there. We don't need to use it. If you're familiar with JulGame, which you're probably not watching this video, then you can just use that. But I would love to show how we create scripts in JulGame. So we're on this player, and we want to add a script to this player. So there is this controller.jl. You're free to add that if you would like, but we can also just create a new one. So we'll just call it player controller. This is going to do more than just control the player, but we're just going to name it this. So we'll create new script. This is kind of cut off, but what it'll do is it'll create a brand new script. It'll put it in our scripts folder, and it will fill it out with all the necessary functions we need to run this in this scene. So let's go back to our window for a second. This, just because we did that, it actually hasn't added to the player, so we'll need to go in here and hit player controller and add that. Right now, as we open it up, all we can do is open script, reload it, or delete it. If we want to remove it from the player, we just click delete. Let's go back to the script. So when we look in the script, we can see that we have this module that encloses all of our code. We have a struct. This struct contains our information for our player, however we want to maintain that information. So for example, we could have like a float 64 with speed. And if you attach types to these in JulGame, it'll pick it up. So if I save this, if you attach it to, or if you attach a type to it, then if we go in the editor and we hit reload player controller, that speed variable will show up. But if I remove it and it's like an any type, because then we don't know what it is. If I hit save, I go back, then I hit reload, it's gone because we don't know what to put on it. But if I type it, at least with basic types right now, like floats and ints and strings, then we can actually edit it in the editor, and that will I believe that will take precedence over this one. I can't remember off the top of my head, but if you just want it clean in the editor, you can do that. Or if you want to initialize it here, we can do this, and we'll use the this keyword. We'll say this.speed is equal to, we'll just say 5. Then now we can actually start writing some code. I'm going to walk you through these functions. These are JulGame functions. That's what it's like JulGame dot, initialize, update, shutdown. This is called like when a scene is loaded or anything like that. Basically the beginning of a scene. This update is called every frame. So this is where our movement's going to go. And this on shutdown is supposed to be called when we're cleaning up a scene. So we can do some like specific cleanup for this script. And anytime you create an entity and we attach a script to it, those are separate. So like that code, the code for each different script that's attached to like an entity will function independently of each other. All right, so now that we have that out of the way, let's start thinking about writing some code. Let's do some movement. Okay, so at the moment with JulGame, we don't have great autocomplete support, so you're just gonna have to like walk through this with me. If you're curious and you're really good at reading source code, then I would recommend just stepping through the source code of JulGame and trying to understand the API. But I'm going to try to explain it as best as I can, and then we'll create some movement. To create movement, we'll need this speed variable, which we've already created. Then we're going to write our movement in this update function. This is going to tell us every frame how to move the player based on some certain input. We will do, we'll create a little variable called x, and we'll set it to 0. And when we do that, what it'll do is anytime we're not moving, it'll reset this value to 0. So every frame, we're resetting this value to 0. And then if we create input, then we're going to update that and then move the player. So we'll create an if statement. So all you need to do is say if, and then we'll say JulGame.input module .get button held down, and then we need to type in all caps main .input, and then in quotations we'll say A, and that's for the A key on the keyboard, and then we'll say X is equal to negative this speed, and so that's moving left. So we're going to be moving in the negative direction on the x-axis, and then we can just duplicate this. We'll just duplicate that, and then before if, we'll put an else with no spaces, and then we'll do, instead of A, we'll do D, and then we'll do a positive speed. And then we'll need to close this with an end. Once we're done with that, now we'll need to, so basically every frame, X starts at 0. If we're holding A down, then we're going to set X to -5. If we're holding D down, we're going to set X to 5. So that will be our velocity that we're moving in the X direction. So next we will update our rigid body, since we've attached that rigid body that applies physics to our character. We will type in rigid body module dot set underscore velocity, and then the first parameter will be this dot parent dot rigid body, comma, and then we'll say math dot vector to f, and then we'll say x, and then this dot parent rigid body dot velocity dot y. So what this is right now for this movement, we're just focused on moving left and right. So for our x, we need to update our player's velocity for the x. And then so this, we need to pass in this rigid body velocity y. This is our current y velocity. So that means we're not affecting it. We need to keep this the same. So this function is setting the velocity of our rigid body, and then we're setting that to x, whatever that ends up being, whether it's 0, -5, or 5. And then the y is going to stay the same. So we're not affecting that. Then we'll just, I guess we'll just save it, and we'll see what happens. So let's go back to our editor window, and then let's, just to be safe, we'll reload this script. We see our speed there, and then we can go to scene. I'm gonna save just to be safe. I don't think I made any changes. Just to be safe, we'll save it, and then play, or stop game. And then now, as I'm gonna switch to the game window. Now I can move. I'm hitting D, I let go. I'm hitting A, I let go. Great. All right, now we have movement. So let's go back. Let's add a jump. So we're gonna do a similar thing. So let's steal this code here. Steal that code there. We'll hit N, or do N, and then this is going to be the space key. So you can type space. I think this is just case insensitive, but I always do all caps. And then we're going to do something very similar here. So we're going to do, we're just going to copy this in here, but instead of set velocity, we'll do add velocity. So set velocity is going to be a very sharp movement. Add velocity is going to kind of like take where we're at and add the velocity. It's going to feel a little bit smoother than setting the velocity. So so we have this parent rigid body, and then instead of doing updating the x here, we're actually going to do the opposite. So we're going to do the y, and then the x is going to remain unchanged. So we're going to do that same exact code for the x, where we take the current x, and then for the y, we're just going to cheat right now, and then we'll do negative this dot speed. And I can't remember if I mentioned in the first video, but in JulGame, the up on the y-axis is actually negative and down on the y-axis is positive. So we need to set this to a negative value. So we'll save that. Let's go back to our scene. We will look at our, we switched off of our player. Let's go to our player, reload player controller, and then scene, scene, play pause scene, yes. Oh, I think my scene was already running. So I'll play pause it again. Oh, there we go. Okay, so we have a bug here. What's the bug? So let's play pause our scene. I moved the player, that's what was throwing me off. So we play pause the scene. Let's go back here, and I realized what I did wrong. So this function is get button held down. So every single frame it's held down, so I can hold on to this for many frames because we have 60 frames a second. So in the time I press the button down and pick it up, it's probably been a few frames. So we are adding this velocity probably like 5 to 10 frames all at once. So that is like making the player just fly off the screen. Instead of doing get button held down, we need to do get button pressed. So get button pressed, what it'll do is no matter how long I hold it down, it'll only read that input once. So as soon as I press it, the frame that it's pressed down, it'll press it once. So we'll add that velocity once. So we're adding like this jump force to the player just in one frame and then letting physics take control after that. So I've saved it. Let's go back. Let us click the player again and then reload that player controller just to be safe. Play pause scene. And then now we're moving. Oh, look at that. Now we can jump. That's great. All right, let's stop our scene. Okay, so one thing you might have noticed is that when the player is moving, they're just going back and forth, right? They're going back and forth and they're not switching directions. So let's just pause the scene real quick. See the player, even though the player's going left, the player's still facing right. We want to flip the player whenever we're moving different directions. So let's go back to our player controller script and let us add a variable, new variable. So this is this is a bool, and this is whether or not the player is facing right. It doesn't matter. You could do is facing left, just however you want to do it. But I'm just going to call it is facing right. And I don't care about typing this here, but if you want to, you can. So I'm going to say is facing right is equal to true. And what that's going to do is that's going to let us keep track of it as we're going left and right, and then we'll flip the player as we see fit. So what we're going to do now is, let's think about this. So if the player's moving left and they're facing right, we want to flip the sprite. And then if the player's moving right and they're facing left, we want to flip the sprite. So it's pretty simple here. So we need to do a check. We'll say if this dot is facing right and we're moving, A is left. So if we're moving left, we need to be facing right to want to change things. So then we'll just say JulGame.component.flip, and we'll say this dot parent dot sprite. And then let's save it. Just cutting in, one thing I forgot was when I created the variable, we need to actually use the this keyword. Otherwise, this is just a variable that's been created out of the scope of everything, and we can't actually check it because it hasn't been defined yet here. So my editor just crashed. Hopefully, I cut this in where yours doesn't need to. So we'll go back to our scene. We'll click on our player. Let's go to our scripts and then reload our player controller. And once we reload our player controller, let's play pause scene. And then look at that, we're flipping. So you see this player is like jumping back and forth because we actually are not updating the bool when we're flipping. That's an easy fix. I just wanted to show the concept here. So let's go back to our script and then let's fill the rest of this logic out. So if we're facing right, then we flip, but we flipped without updating. So we'll need to say this dot facing right is equal to, I mean, you can do, you could either do this, or you could just say um, false for peace of mind. That's what I'm going to do. And then we'll copy this code block. And then in the D, it's just the opposite. So if we're not facing right, then we're still going to flip, but then we're going to say is facing right is true. So let's save that. Let's go back. Let's go to our player, reload our script, scene, play pause, start the scene. And then look, we're moving left and right, and now we're flipping the player. Great. So let's do one more thing. Let's add a little bit of an animation to the player. And this is, for me, this is pretty fun. So let's stop our scene, play pause scene, boom. Let's go to our player and let's look at our animator. So we'll go to add new animator. And what the animator does, it just looks and says, "Hey, do we have a sprite on us? Okay, we're going to use that sprite." So you're pretty limited right now with the animations. You can only use the sprite that the player currently has attached, unless you're doing things in the code to manually switch that sprite out. So let's go to our animation. And our animated FPS is going to be, we'll say 4, I guess. It's not going to be 60. 60 will be twitching. So when we open a frame, what it'll do is it'll open a new window, and this is a great experience right now. We'll open a new window, and each frame will have its own window. And for this, we just want 2 frames. So we'll add a frame. We're not going to open it right now. We'll focus on the first frame. And the first frame is this. And let's change our grid step to 17 again. And then we're going to make the same selection we made earlier. Hopefully. And if there's an issue there, what we can do is we can update this crop. So this crop is a little bit too high. And remember, Y positive and Y is down. So we just need to add 1 there. And then now we're good. So now we have this frame. And then let's close it. It'll close its window. And then we'll open a new window, dock it, and then we'll add the other frame. There's only 2 frames here, so we don't have to keep doing this process. It is a pain, and we will work on that in the future, but this is what we have to deal with now. So we drop it to 17 so we can see, and then let's hopefully catch it, and we'll need to do this at the same, it'll have to end at the same level so we're not jumping around. So we'll need to add 1 more to this Y here. So we'll make it 16, and then now it's level with this guy's feet. Let's hit save, and then what we can do is we can actually preview this animation. I like this speed. This is a good speed. I think by default it shouldn't play, but let's see. I can't remember. So let's go scene. Okay, it is playing. So what we'll need to do is we'll need to activate and deactivate this animation when the player is moving. Because obviously as we're standing there, we don't want the player to be animated. All right, so what we'll need to do is update the frames per second and the current animation. The player is by default in this, this stance in our animation. If we look at our animation, the first frame is that standing, the second frame is that running. So by default, we basically can just say, if we're not moving, we're in this animation, we want our FPS to be 0. So if I set it to 0, and I go to the scene, play pause scene, we're not doing anything. So let's go and update that. This is our indicator here, our X, because if we're not doing any of this, X is 0. If we're not hitting left, we're not hitting right, X is 0. So we can do, let's start with that case. We'll say if X is equal to 0, then we'll do an else if, or I guess just an else. So if X is equal to 0, then this dot parent, and this is how we get our components, dot animator dot current animation. So that's, right now we only have 1 animation, so that's going to be our current animation. Dot animated FPS, is equal to 0. We'll just copy and paste that, and we'll set it to 4 otherwise. So if we're not moving, it's 0, otherwise it's 4. And there's going to be an issue here, but there'll be a simple fix for it. But let's see. Let's close all this. Let's go to our script. Let's reload it. Scene, play, pause, scene. And then, now we're not moving. Now we're moving. But there should be an issue. See that? When we stop, we're still in the running position. We want to reset the player to that first frame if we're not moving. Go to scene, stop our scene. Let's go back to our code. And then we just need a line of code that updates that frame. And we really only need it in this case, right? Because in the run, it's not going to matter as much. We need to draw from, we'll just say JulGame.animator module force underscore frame underscore update. So we'll say this dot parent dot animator. And then our second one will be the frame we want to update to. So the first frame is 1. The index of that is 1 because Julia is not 0 indexed. Let's go back. Let's click on our player. Let's reload that. Scene, play, pause, scene. Yes. So now we're running. And we stop. Boom. Every time we stop, we reset. Every time we stop, we reset. So now that looks much more normal in terms of game animations. So now we have a player that can run. We have a player that can jump. Oh wait, when we're jumping, that animation's still going like that. So the next episode we'll be continuing fixing that other animation, and we'll be adding probably the rest of the gameplay, which will be adding a couple of enemies and maybe building out the level. Yeah, I guess we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.